let's take a look at what ISO, high ISO actually looks like, practically speaking, on one particular camera. Remember, one of the reasons why we go out here and shoot things with different ISOs on our camera, right, with our exercise, is to get a sense of how our camera is going to give sort of noisy or less noisy results. This is very much a per camera thing. If you borrow a friend's older camera, it's going to have worse noise. If you go and check out a newer camera, it's probably going to have less noise. As cameras have gotten better and better, noise has become less and less of an issue, but it's still there, especially if you make a big exposure adjustment. So let's take a look. So here we go. This is an image that I shot late at night, ISO 100, right down there. Looks great. So ISO 100, right? Very, very low noise. It's basically my, or it is my base ISO. The result of shooting with that low ISO is that I had to have a really long shutter speed, right? I'm sitting here, I'm not very sensitive to the light that's coming in, so I have to really like slow down my shutter speed to let light come in for a very, very long time. So if I look here, right, we have these great streaks from the traffic. That looks fine. And if I zoom in here on the cornice, yeah, detail looks great. I can read all of the text over there. I can see little architectural curlicues and hoop-de-doos and other very technically named things. No noise to speak of. Even if I go over here and look in that sort of solid dark area, which would be the place that noise would be the most apparent, don't really notice it. So that's ISO 100, looking good, but again, very, very long shutter speed. ISO 200, you know, it's not that different from 100. Whoops. Right, come in there. It's Moses. Hey, Moses, how you doing? You know, still read the text, still see the architectural detail. That's fine. All right. ISO 400, you know, it's still long enough of a shutter speed, or long enough of an exposure that we're getting these nice streaks through there. Again, you know, everything looks pretty fine. I'm starting to get a little bit of speckliness, but not really noticeable. If I look at it here, can't tell a damn thing. 800, just going to skip ahead a little bit. 1600, 3200. Now, 3200, one thing you can notice is that motion is less blurry. So here's a guy crossing the street. Whoops, I'm standing right in front of him. Sorry, guy crossing the street. There you are. And two guys, actually, or two people. I don't actually know what their genders are because they're a little blurry. They're not so blurry I can't see them, but they are blurry enough that I don't have a clear societal marker of gender identity. So there they are out there looking good, doing their thing. And if I go in here to this detail, we really can start to see that texture that we're getting with the noise. So, you know, this architectural detail up here, right, which is something that was relatively crispy in the ISO 100 shots. This text down here, which again, right, was something that, you know, the edges were pretty hard in the ISO 100 shots, is now starting to get a distinct kind of pebbly texture. And if I go in here to look at that dark night sky, definitely a lot of noise going on in there. Now, again, remember, we're looking at that zoomed way in. If I look at it here, right, if I see it on my screen passing by, never going to notice. But when you make a print, for example, which is much more detailed than your screen, you really are going to be able to see that. The other thing that happens at high ISO is that you start to lose a little bit of the dynamic range, meaning your highlights blow out faster, your shadows block up sooner. And that's another thing that can be a downside to working at a high ISO. Even if you don't need to necessarily worry about that noise and that detail, you may lose some tonal range in your image at the higher ISOs. So ISO 6400, right? That's pretty high. And that is a big ol' smeary mess. Not good. Not good, John Jacob Astor. ISO 100, no, 12,800. That's, whew, I can't even tell who gave them that library or who Beardo is over here. So yeah, that's kind of what you're going to run into. But, right, like nice frozen motion, right? I mean, frozen, right? For a given value of frozen, that is pretty frozen motion there on the taxi, right? So it's a trade-off. I was able to freeze that taxi right there. I'm able to freeze the person walking across the street on the other side. But if I wanted to be able to get in there and interrogate the details of the building, it's just, right? It's just not going to be possible. It's a big sort of indistinct mess. So look at that, right? That's 120, 12,800. If we go all the way back to the very beginning, that's what we had in our first image. So again, right, like nice detail on there, very distinct letter forms. You can see these little thingies up here. We can read that guy's figure very well. Very, very long exposure, lots of streakiness, but enough detail in the image that we can really get in there, see it. We could blow it up pretty big in a print. Whereas once we get into ISO, even 3200, we're really losing some of that. Certainly the text on there is no longer legible in the way that it was. So this is just an example. Your camera is going to be different. That's one of the really important things in getting to know your camera, is understanding the limitations of your ISO, right? You may be able to say, hey, 3200, no big deal, man. Bring it on. I can't, right? I'm not going to shoot at ISO 3200, but I don't really shoot in a way that asks me to use ISO 3200 very often. You know, I'm shooting with strobes, I'm shooting in well-lit environments, I'm shooting outside, like on a tripod. I can use these things or set up my exposures so that I'm not at those high ISOs, and so the limitations of my camera aren't that big of a deal. Your mileage, as they say, may vary. So go out there, experiment with it, pay attention, zoom all the way in, right? Remember, when you look at a little thing on your screen, you can't actually tell if there's grain or not. Zoom all the way in, start to get a sense of how your camera functions at these high ISOs, so that when you're going out there to set up your shot, to make your picture, you know how big of a deal that ISO choice is going to be as far as the aesthetics and the impact on your picture.